when I found 98 brand new houses worth $34 million sitting on land I'd owned for 30 years. That HOA Karen thought she'd pulled off the perfect heist. Too bad she just handed me the deed to her entire subdivision. Picture coming home to discover an entire neighborhood where your cattle used to graze. Families unpacking U-Hauls, kids chalking driveways, all on your property without permission. Victoria Ashworth had the audacity to serve me with a restraining order, claiming I was threatening families with surveying equipment. This woman stole my land, then painted me as the dangerous neighbor, terrorizing Chincoteague children. What she didn't know, my grandfather's 1924 contract means every house she built automatically became mine the moment they poured the first foundation. Soon she'd learn why you never steal from a land surveyor who's been documenting property theft for 40 years, especially when federal law is on your side. Before we dive in, what would you do if someone built 98 houses on your land? Drop your revenge fantasies. Bellawand, tell me where you're watching from. My name is Zeke Thornfield. Friends call me Zeke, and I'm what you might call old school Tennessee stubborn. At 67, I've spent 40 years as a land surveyor, walking property lines and settling boundary disputes across 3 counties. My grandfather left me 847 acres of prime rolling hills back in '94, along with a piece of advice. Boy, never trust a man who measures land without getting his boots muddy. The morning mist here in Millbrook County carries the sweet scent of honeysuckle, mixed with diesel exhaust from the interstate. That's progress creeping into farm country, I suppose. Every dawn, I'd walk my fence lines with black coffee, listening to gravel crunch under me boots while checking for storm damage. The metallic taste of well water and the earthy smell of cattle reminded this was real farming, not the suburban fantasy taking over Tennessee. My late wife Martha used to say, I kept property records like other men collect baseball cards obsessively, and with pride that borders on insanity. When she passed 5 years ago, our 2 kids moved off to chase city dreams in Portland and Atlanta. Can't blame them for wanting more excitement than watching grass grow, but it left me rattling around a nice farmhouse with just my heritage, cattle, and memories. Enter Victoria Ashworth, call me Vicky, the kind of woman who treats a clipboard like a nuclear weapon and speaks in passive-aggressive, corporate speak that could make Gandhi throw punches. At 52, she's mastered that suburban HOA, blonde highlights fresh from the salon, white Lexus SUV detailed weekly, and the dead-eyed smile of someone who's reported neighbors for having the wrong shade of mailbox. Vicky's married to Brad Ashworth, our town councilman, which around Sweetwater Springs means she thinks she's royalty. For 8 years, she had been circling my property like a buzzard, sending intermediaries with insulting offers for my unused pasture land. The smell of desperation was stronger than her department store perfume every time she showed up uninvited with another generous proposal. The real trouble started when I returned from a 3-week visit, helping my daughter Sarah through a messy divorce in Oregon. I'd been looking forward to getting back to my quiet routine. Coffee at sunrise, checking cattle, maybe fixing fence posts if I felt ambitious. You know, the kind of retirement that doesn't involve conference calls or HOA drama. But driving up my gravel driveway, something felt wrong. Instead of cattle looing and meadowlarks singing, I heard the suburban symphony of lawnmowers humming and children shrieking, sounds that had no business being on my back 40 acres. He grabbed my surveying equipment and headed toward the noise, figuring maybe some kids were trespassing or a family had broken down near my property line. Walking through my pasture, the air carried unfamiliar scents of fresh asphalt and new lumber. Instead of wildflowers and creek water, what I found made my coffee mug slip from my hands and explode against a limestone rock. 8 pristine houses spread across my land like a suburban infection. Manicured lawns where my Angus cattle used to graze. A decorative stone entrance reading Heritage Meadows Estates in script fancier than a wedding invitation. Families unpacking. U-Hauls, kids drawing chalk masterpieces on driveways. Golden retrievers chasing tennis balls. The whole American dream package built on every acre of my back pasture. I stood there gawking like Atarist, wondering if I'd somehow driven to the wrong county. But there was my grandfather's oak tree with Martha's initials carved in the bark. There was Willow Creek where I'd learned to fish. This was definitely my land, but somebody had turned it into suburbia without bothering to ask permission. That's when Vicky materialized in a golf cart wearing an official HOA badge, rolling toward me like she owned the place, which, judging by her smug expression, she absolutely believed she did. "Excuse me, sir," she announced in that syrupy tone that immediately made me jaw clench. "This is private property. Heritage Meadows is a gated community for residents and invitajuists only." I looked around at my trees, my creek, the land where my grandfather taught me to respect property boundaries, and realized I was about to get a masterclass in small-town corruption. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady despite wanting to explode, "I think there's been some kind of mistake. This is my property. Has been since 1994. Vickislaw sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Oh, honey, I'm afraid you're confused. The Heritage Meadows development was purchased legally from Millbrook Development Corporation 2 years ago. She pulled out a folder thick enough to choke a horse, flipping through pages with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. See right here, 847 acres purchased for fair market value. I'm sure this is just a surveying error on your part. The condescension in her voice made my blood pressure spike. But 40 years of dealing with property disputes taught me to document everything and stay calm when someone's trying to rob you blind. Mind if I see those documents? I'm not legally required to share private HOA business with trespassers. She sniffed, clutching that folder like it contained nuclear launch codes. But I'll tell you what, I'm feeling generous today. These families have children starting school in 2 weeks. Surely we can work out some arrangement that doesn't disrupt their lives. That's when I knew this wasn't Emma's deck. This was a con job wrapped in suburban righteousness. 3 days later, Deputy Mike Ashworth knocked on my door with papers and a smirk that told me everything about getting fair treatment in this county. The restraining order claimed I'd trespassed on Heritage Meadows property and threatened residents with survey and equipment in a menacing manner, apparently carrying a measuring tape now qualified as brandishing a weapon. Theater prohibited me from entering my own back 40, and Mike made sure to mention that violation meant jail time. Vicky wasn't done flexing her suburban warfare muscles. Within a week, every Heritage Meadows resident received a letter about an unstable former landowner who posed a potential safety risk to families and children. She organized a neighborhood safety committee that patrolled my property line with the dedication of border guards, snapping photos of me feeding my own cattle, like I was running a meth lab. The social media assault came next. Vicky posted side-by-side photos on the Sweetwater Springs Facebook group, my weathered farmhousey versus the pristine subdivision, claiming my unkempt property was attracting vermin and lowering property. The comment section exploded into digital warfare between locals who knew my family and newcomers who bought Vicky's performance, hook, line, and sinker. But here's where 40 years of surveying experience pays dividends. While Vicky was busy playing victim online, I drove to the county courthouse and started pulling records. The filing fee for that supposed property transfer caught my eye immediately. $50 measly. Back in my early day surveying, I learned that Tennessee requires big property transfers to have notarized affidavit with multiple witnesses and filing fees that match the transaction size. This smelled fishier than week-old catfish. The real smoking in was the notary stamp. Eleanor Hutchkins had handled real estate closings for 3 decades. Sweet old lady who made the best peach cobbler in the county. Problem was, Eleanor died 6 months before she allegedly notarized my property transfer. Unless she was signing documents from the great beyond, somebody had forged her stamp. I called my old surveyor buddy, Clarence Bulldog McKenzie, who's forgotten more about property law than most lawyers ever learn. Bulldog spent 2 days with his GPS equipment, walking every inch of my boundaries, spitting tobacco juice and muttering about amateur hour fraud attempts. Zeke, he finally said, your property lines are accurate within 6 and 10. That whole subdivision is sitting on your land like fleas on a hound dog. While I was building my case, Vicky escalated to psychological warfare. Sentinel Security Services started paid Heritage Meadows and golf carts with radio headsets like my Angus cattle posed a terrorist threat. Then came the state licensing board complaint claiming I was mentally declining and dangerous to public safety. Her evidence sting on accessing my own property. The county piled on by threatening to condo my farmhouse as a public nuisance. Apparently, 70 years of honest wear made my home an eyesore. Comparetto, the cookie-cutter McMansion, squatting on my pasture. That evening, checking my fence line in the dying light, I noticed at something that made my skin crawl. Security cameras, hidden in my oak trees with cables snaking back toward